What is I am going to in Spanish?
Voy a. Voy a.
How would you say I'm going to prepare the coffee?
Voy a preparar el café. Voy a preparar el café.
Now, this is one way to express the future tense in Spanish, just as we would in English, to say something that I'm going to do that. I'm going to prepare the coffee. I'm going to make dinner. And we use this very often in English, just as it's used in Spanish. However, we have an alternative way to express the future tense in English without using going to. We can also say will. For instance, I will prepare the coffee later. I will do it if you want. I will be going on holiday, on vacation in Spain in 3 months. So we have two different ways to express the future tense in English. One is to use going to, saying things like, he's going to do it later. But you can also use will in English, he will do it later. Now, there is the same in Spanish. There is going to, which we've used a lot of. But there is also a tense that we're going to refer to as will here, if only for ease of use. So, going to we've done and we've looked at that a lot. But we're now going to look at will, which is an additional tense, which is used a lot in Spanish. There tends to be a preference for this will tense in writing in Spanish, but it can also be used just as much in speech. To make the will tense in Spanish is extremely simple. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to borrow the words we've been using in Spanish for the Spanish past tense. So, for instance, what is I have for the Spanish past tense? How would you say I have?
He.
Now, you can use this actually to make will in Spanish. You're simply going to borrow it and stick it onto the end of another word, and it will give you a new tense by that simple trick. So, what is, for instance, to visit in Spanish?
Visitar. Visitar.
All you need to do to get the will tense is add that word for have onto the end. So, if you make that into one word, so literally you have to visit, and then add the word for I have straight onto the end of it, add that sound from I have straight onto the end, what will you get?
Visitaré. Visitaré.
So again, to visit,
Visitar. Visitar.
and I have for the past tense.
He.
And again, now stuck together, so it literally is something like to visit I have. How would you say that?
Visitaré. Visitaré.
Now, in Spanish, that means I will visit. It is literally to visit with I have put on the end. What is to reserve in Spanish?
Reservar. Reservar.
Using the same technique, how would you say I will reserve?
Reservaré. Reservaré.
What is to invite in Spanish?
Invitar. Invitar.
I will invite.
Invitaré. Invitaré.
What is to buy in Spanish?
Comprar. Comprar.
I will buy.
Compraré. Compraré.
And again, What is I will visit?
Visitaré. Visitaré.
What is he has in Spanish?
A. A.
So let's do the same again. So in order to say he will visit, you'll simply stick on the word for he has onto the end of to visit. So how will you say he will visit?
Visitará. Visitará.
She will visit.
Visitará. Visitará.
How would you say you informal have?
Has. Has.
So to say you informal will visit, again, you'll take to visit and add the word for have for you informal. So how would you say you informal will visit?
Visitarás. Visitarás.
How would you say they will visit?
Visitarán. Visitarán.
And finally, we will visit.
Visitaremos. Visitaremos.
So, with this simple trick, we're able to find an entirely new tense in Spanish. You simply take the appropriate past tense word for have and simply put it on the end of to visit, to invite, to eat. And then you have the new tense, simply by adding this sound onto the end of each word. What is to eat in Spanish?
Comer. Comer.
So, once more, adding the sound of I have on the end, how would you say I will eat?
Comeré. Comeré.
How would you say I will eat with you?
Comeré con usted. Comeré con usted.
I will eat with you later.
Comeré con usted más tarde. Comeré con usted más tarde.
Of course, you don't have to use this tense in order to express the future. For instance, you could instead say, I'm going to eat with you later. How would you say that?
Voy a comer con usted más tarde. Voy a comer con usted más tarde.
How would you say, I'm going to reserve a table?
Voy a reservar una mesa. Voy a reservar una mesa.
How about I will reserve a table?
Reservaré una mesa. Reservaré una mesa.
How would you say, I'm going to visit Madrid?
Voy a visitar Madrid. Voy a visitar Madrid.
How about I will visit Madrid?
Visitaré Madrid. Visitaré Madrid.
How about we will visit Madrid?
Visitaremos Madrid. Visitaremos Madrid.
How about they will visit Madrid?
Visitarán Madrid. Visitarán Madrid.
They won't visit Madrid.
No visitarán Madrid. no visitarán Madrid.
How would you say you informal will visit Madrid?
Visitarás Madrid. Visitarás Madrid.
How about you won't visit Madrid?
No visitarás Madrid. No visitarás Madrid.
How would you turn it into a question and say, won't you visit Madrid?
¿No visitarás Madrid? ¿No visitarás Madrid?
Why won't you visit Madrid?
¿Por qué no visitarás Madrid? ¿Por qué no visitarás Madrid?
I would like to know why you won't visit Madrid.
Quisiera saber por qué no visitarás Madrid. Quisiera saber por qué no visitarás Madrid.
So, these endings, these words for have that we're putting on the end, are constant throughout Spanish, and they will allow you to access this future tense in Spanish in a very easy way. So long as you know how to say I have, he has, she has, you have, they have, and we have for the past tense in Spanish, you can now also use these, putting them on the end of other words in order to create a future tense. But that doesn't in any way mean that you can't use going to if you prefer that for the future. But you do need to be aware of this, particularly as it's going to be used by other people, and you're going to find it when you're reading things in Spanish. But as far as speaking goes, feel free to use either and to use which you're more comfortable with. They're both quite useful. How would you say I have prepared in Spanish?
He preparado. He preparado.
How about I have visited?
He visitado. He visitado.
He has prepared.
Ha preparado. Ha preparado.
Now, in Spanish, just as in English, you're not always going to want to use the same tense when you're talking about the past. For instance, in English, sometimes you're going to want to say, I have prepared, but other times you're going to want to say, I prepared. So you may say something like, I prepared it this morning. Or other times you might want to say, I have prepared this sort of thing before. But you'll switch between these tenses in English, just as you will in Spanish. So far we've learnt for the past tense using have, so things like I have prepared, we have visited, we have eaten. But we haven't yet looked at how to say things simply like I prepared or I visited without using have. So you can use both tenses in English. You can use a sort of past tense with have or talking about the past without have, and the same is possible in Spanish. And to use this other way of talking about the past is very easy in Spanish. We can start by taking a word, again, like preparation. We've already used these words a lot, these words ending in ion, and they're very useful. And what we're going to do with this word ending in ion is, once more, we're going to cut the ation from the end of preparation. And in its place, we're going to add what I like to call the cafe E. This is the E that's on the end of the word cafe in English. And this cafe E is pronounced in the same way it is in English. So we say cafe, we don't say cafe. So that E on the end has a sort of an A sound in cafe. So we're going to use this cafe E and we are going to add it onto what is left after we've cut the ation from preparation. So, once the ation is cut off preparation, we're left with prepar, a sort of prepar. And we're going to add the cafe E onto the end of that. How do you think what you would pronounce that word we're left with? So the prepar with the cafe E on the end.
Preparé. Preparé.
In Spanish, that means I prepared. So again, let's try I have prepared.
He preparado. He preparado.
So that's the tense we've explored a lot. But if you don't want to say it with have, if instead of I have prepared, you want to simply say I prepared, again, cut the ation from the end of preparation, and in its place add that cafe E. So again, how would you say I prepared?
Preparé. Preparé.
It may be confusing suddenly needing to change between these tenses, but we're going to have quite a bit of practice with them. How would you say, again, using the past tense with have, I have prepared the coffee?
He preparado el café. He preparado el café.
Now let's go back to the past tense without have. Again, cut off the ation from the end of preparation and in its place add a cafe E. How would you say I prepared the coffee? No have.
Preparé el café. Preparé el café.
Let's take the word decoration now. Cut off the ation and in its place add a cafe E. This will give you I decorated. How would you say I decorated the house?
Decoré la casa. Decoré la casa.
And now let's go back to the past tense with have. I have decorated the house.
He decorado la casa. He decorado la casa.
But I decorated the house.
Decoré la casa. Decoré la casa.
Let's take invitation. Again, let's start with what we're very familiar with. How would you say, I have invited?
He invitado. He invitado.
But now the past tense without have, again, cut off the ation and in its place add a cafe E.
Invité. Invité.
How would you say I invited Paul? Literally, I invited to Paul.
Invité a Paul. Invité a Paul.
How would you say I reserved?
Reservé. Reservé.
How about I reserved a table?
Reservé una mesa. Reservé una mesa.
Make it negative so that it becomes I didn't reserve a table.
No reservé una mesa. No reservé una mesa.
And how would you say I decorated the house?
Decoré la casa. Decoré la casa.
I invited Paul.
Invité a Paul. Invité a Paul.
Finally, simply I prepared on its own.
Preparé. Preparé.
To say you prepared or he prepared or she prepared, you do exactly the same thing as you did when you made I prepared. You cut off the ation from the end of preparation, but this time, instead of adding a cafe E on the end, you add an O instead. So it's exactly the same, but instead of adding a cafe E, you add an O. Let's try first again, one more time. What was I prepared?
Preparé. Preparé.
Now, instead of ending in that cafe E, it is instead going to end with an O. So how would you say he prepared?
Preparó. Preparó.
She prepared.
Preparó. Preparó.
She prepared the coffee.
Preparó el café. Preparó el café.
How would you say you prepared?
Preparó. Preparó.
How about you decorated?
Decoró. Decoró.
You decorated the house.
Decoró la casa. Decoró la casa.
You invited Paul.
Invitó a Paul. Invitó a Paul.
Again, keep in mind that you're just cutting off the ation. For instance, for invitation, you're cutting off the ation and adding an O in its place. How would you say she invited Paul?
Invitó a Paul. Invitó a Paul.
She reserved a table.
Reservó una mesa. Reservó una mesa.
So again, for this past tense without have, obviously you don't need the word have for it because you're simply saying she reserved a table. Of course, if you want to say she has reserved a table, that's different. How would you say that? She has reserved a table.
Ha reservado una mesa. Ha reservado una mesa.
And now simply, she reserved a table.
Reservó una mesa. Reservó una mesa.
To say you in formal prepared, again, we do exactly the same thing more or less. We cut off the ation from the end of preparation, but this time instead of adding a or o, instead we will add
Haste. Haste.
So, once again, let's take preparation, cut off the ation, and then at the end you're going to add.
Haste. Haste.
So how would you say you informal prepared?
Preparaste. Preparaste.
You prepared the coffee.
Preparaste el café. Preparaste el café.
You decorated the house.
Decoraste la casa. Decoraste la casa.
You invited Paul.
Invitaste a Paul. Invitaste a Paul.
You reserved a table.
Reservaste una mesa. Reservaste una mesa.
So again, how would you say I prepared?
Preparé. Preparé.
You formal prepared.
Preparó. Preparó.
You informal prepared.
Preparaste. Preparaste.
So, in order to use this tense effectively in Spanish, you simply need to know which ending to put on. And you'll get used to that through practice. So one more time, how would you say I reserved?
Reservé. Reservé.
He, she, or you formal reserved?
Reservó. Reservó.
You informal reserved?
Reservaste. Reservaste.
Now, in order to say you, all of you, prepared, or they prepared, which again is the same, once more you do exactly the same as you've already done. Cut off the ation from the end of preparation, but this time, instead of adding the e or the o or the aste, you will instead add
Aaron. Aaron.
So, how would you say you, meaning all of you, prepared?
Prepararon. Prepararon.
How about they prepared?
Prepararon. Prepararon.
They prepared the coffee.
Prepararon el café. Prepararon el café.
They decorated the house.
Decoraron la casa. Decoraron la casa.
They invited Paul.
Invitaron a Paul. Invitaron a Paul.
Finally, they reserved a table.
Reservaron una mesa. Reservaron una mesa.
So once more, how would you say I reserved?
Reservé. Reservé.
He, she, or you formal reserved.
Reservó. Reservó.
You informal reserved.
Reservaste. Reservaste.
You, meaning all of you or the lot of you, or they reserved.
Reservaron. Reservaron.
Finally, in order to say we prepared, once more you go through exactly the same process. Cut off the ation from the end of preparation, but this time you're going to add
Amos. Amos.
So how would you say we prepared?
Preparamos. Preparamos.
We prepared the coffee.
Preparamos el café. Preparamos el café.
We decorated the house.
Decoramos la casa. Decoramos la casa.
We invited Paul.
Invitamos a Paul. Invitamos a Paul.
We reserved a table.
Reservamos una mesa. Reservamos una mesa.
So again, how would you say I invited Paul?
Invité a Paul. Invité a Paul.
He, she, or you invited Paul.
Invitó a Paul. Invitó a Paul.
You informal invited Paul.
Invitaste a Paul. Invitaste a Paul.
You, meaning the two of you, both of you, all of you, or they invited Paul.
Invitaron a Paul. Invitaron a Paul.
Finally, we invited Paul.
Invitamos a Paul. Invitamos a Paul.
Now, these endings are not necessarily always the easiest to remember, so feel free to go back over this until you feel comfortable. It's something that will take a little time to sink in, but it's nothing to worry about, as it isn't essentially particularly complicated in any way.